What if everything you think you know about Hawaii is wrong? Forget the beaches, forget the resorts. Living here means your house sits on land the lava has already buried once, and knowing it will bury it again. The last major eruption boiled the ocean on contact, filled the air with hydrochloric acid lethal to breathe, and swallowed an entire neighbourhood whole. People came back, stood where their streets used to be, and rebuilt on the fresh black rock. But the lava is only the start. Everything you are about to see on these islands, every town, every road, every story that does not match the postcards, was built on what the fire left behind. This is the side of Hawaii nobody talks about, and we are just getting started. Most national parks preserve something that finished forming a long time ago. Hawaii Volcanoes. National Park is still being built, and the ground here shifts, cracks, and occasionally opens up without warning. Steam rises from vents along the road, and the air carries the faint smell of sulphur, a constant reminder that the rock beneath your feet is not as solid as it looks. Actual communities sit within the eruption zone, rebuilding on land that has been buried before and will likely be buried again, because in Hawaii, living next to a volcano is not reckless. It is simply where home happens to be. The park covers over 300,000 acres, running from sea level all the way to over 13,000 feet. Crossing climate zones that go from tropical coast to subarctic summit in a single drive. For native Hawaiians, this is not a tourist attraction. The volcano is Pele, a living deity, and the lava is not destruction, but creation. Kilauea erupted almost continuously for 35 years, adding new land to the island while simultaneously destroying everything already standing on it. In 2018, it split open a residential neighbourhood called Leilani Estates, swallowing over 700 homes and displacing thousands of people who had built their lives on what turned out to be an active rift zone, the kind of lesson geology teaches only once. When the lava reached the ocean, it boiled the seawater on contact and sent clouds of hydrochloric acid into the air, a phenomenon called laze that is lethal if you breathe enough of it. The eruption also drained Kilauea's summit lava lake entirely, collapsing the crater floor and dropping it hundreds of feet in a matter of weeks, reshaping a landmark that had looked the same for generations. Residents who returned found streets gone, property lines meaningless, and in some cases their land replaced by an entirely new landscape of black rock, yet some rebuilt anyway, because leaving felt worse than starting over. The Thurston lava tube, known to Hawaiians as Nahuku, formed when the outer surface of a lava river cooled and hardened, while the molten interior drained away, leaving an empty tunnel behind, like a hollowed-out vein. Walking through it feels like standing inside the artery of a volcano. Smooth walls shaped entirely by flowing rock, not by water or wind, with roots poking through the ceiling from the rainforest growing directly above. Mauna Loa is the largest active volcano on the planet. So massive it makes up over half the Big Island's total landmass, and measured from its base on the ocean floor, it rises over 30,000 feet, making it taller than Everest by a wide margin. It erupted again in 2022, for the first time in nearly 4 decades, sending lava flows toward the Saddle Road, the only highway connecting the east and west sides of the island, and the single route some communities depend on for hospital access, school, and supplies. Living on the slopes of Mauna Loa means accepting that the road to work, the nearest doctor, and the only grocery store could all be cut off by a single eruption, and that this possibility is not theoretical but overdue. While the Big Island is still being built by eruptions, Kauai, the oldest of the main islands, is being slowly torn apart by rain, and Waimea Canyon is the proof. The canyon stretches over 10 miles long and more than 3,000 feet deep, carved not only by a river over millions of years, but largely by the catastrophic collapse of the island's original volcano, with rain doing the rest, and on Kauai, the rain never stops. The red and green layers exposed in the canyon walls are different ages of volcanic rock, each one representing a different eruption, which makes the whole gorge a cross-section of the island's geological life laid bare in colour. For the small communities along the rim and the town of Waimea below, this landscape is not scenery. It is the reason the soil grows anything, the rivers keep running, and the farms along the coast have survived for generations. The town of Waimea itself was where Captain Cook first landed in Hawaii in 1778, beginning a chain of events, disease, colonisation, and overthrow, that changed the islands permanently. Waipio Falls drops over 800 feet into the canyon, but its flow depends entirely on recent rainfall. After a dry spell, it can slow to a trickle, or vanish completely, and after a storm, it turns into a white streak visible from lookouts on the opposite rim. Most visitors only photograph it from a distance, but the trail down leads through exposed ridgelines where a wrong step puts you in open air with nothing below. The Wailua River is the only navigable river in the entire state of Hawaii. Every other waterway across the islands is too short, too steep, or too shallow to travel by boat, which says more about the geology of the state than anything else. For centuries, this river was one of the most sacred corridors in Hawaiian culture, with chiefs living along its banks and its mouth considered one of the most powerful spiritual sites in the islands. Today, kayakers paddle upriver toward waterfalls, but the same water still irrigates taro fields that have been farmed in the same way for generations. A crop and a practice that quietly outlasted everything else. Above the canyon, Koki State Park sits at over 4,000 feet. Cool, wet, and completely different from the beach towns below, with temperatures that can drop low enough to need a jacket, which surprises most visitors who packed only for the tropics. The park's trails lead to ridgeline lookouts over the Kalalau Valley, where the land drops thousands of feet to the ocean in a single glance, and the view on a clear day reaches so far it barely looks real. Feral pigs introduced to the island centuries ago tear through the native forest here constantly, ripping up root systems and spreading invasive plants. A slow-motion, ecological disaster that park rangers fight daily with no end in sight. Tourists call it a day trip. For the people who live at the end of the Hana highway, this road is a lifeline, and sometimes a trap. It runs 64 miles along Maui's northeastern coast, with over 600 curves and 59 single-lane bridges, most of them built in the early 1900s, and barely wide enough for one car at a time, which means every bridge is a negotiation between whoever arrives first. There is no shortcut, no bypass, and no alternative route. If the road closes due to landslides or flooding, which happens regularly during the wet season, the community of Hana is cut off completely, and no one is getting in or out until the crews clear whatever fell. Every piece of lumber, every bag of groceries, every gallon of fuel for the entire eastern end of Maui travels this road, and when something breaks down on one of those bridges, people simply wait. The road was built with convict labour, inmates who carved it into the cliffs by hand because no machinery could reach the terrain, and in many places the original stonework is still what holds the road up. For residents, the drive is not an adventure. It is a commute that can take 2 hours each way in good conditions, and significantly longer when the weather turns, or when a line of rental cars crawls bumper to bumper through every hairpin turn. Hana is one of the last places in Hawaii where native Hawaiian culture still shapes daily life more than tourism does. The population sits at roughly 1,200. Many families trace their roots here back generations, and the town has one gas station, one general store, and no chain restaurants. Queen Ka'ahumanu, one of the most powerful figures in Hawaiian history, was born in this village. She went on to abolish the traditional kapu system that governed all of Hawaiian society, arguably the single most disruptive act in the island's cultural history, and it started with a woman from this tiny, roadless corner of Maui. The isolation that makes Hana difficult to reach is also what has protected it. Development never arrived in force because the road made everything too expensive and too slow, which is exactly why the town still looks and feels the way it does. But that isolation cuts both ways. Medical emergencies mean helicopter evacuations, storms can leave the town without power or road access for days, and living here requires a tolerance for uncertainty that most people on the mainland would never accept. Waipio Valley was once the political and spiritual centre of the Big Island, the Valley of the Kings, where Hawaiian royalty lived, ruled and were buried, and where the gods were said to walk at night. Today, a handful of families still farm taro on the valley floor, using methods passed down for centuries, growing the root crop that remains central to Hawaiian identity and diet, a plant so important that in Hawaiian tradition, it is considered the older brother of the human race. The only road into Waipio drops at a 25% grade, steep enough that regular vehicles, are banned from driving it, and even four-wheel drive trucks struggle in wet conditions, which on this side of the island means most conditions. There is no municipal water or sewer system in the valley. People rely on catchment water, solar power, and off-grid solutions, living in a way that most of Hawaii abandoned decades ago, but that the residents here chose to keep. Flooding is constant because the valley sits at the mouth of several streams draining the Kahala Mountains, one of the wettest areas in the state, and when heavy rains hit, the valley floor can go underwater in hours, something residents have learned to prepare for the way mainland people prepare for winter. The county eventually restricted tourist vehicle access to the valley road after years of accidents, breakdowns and overcrowding on a slope that was never designed for traffic in the first place. At the base of the valley, Waipio black sand beach stretches between the cliffs and the open Pacific, made entirely of crushed volcanic rock ground down by the ocean over thousands of years, with strong currents and unpredictable waves that make swimming genuinely dangerous. There are no lifeguards, no warning signs, and no safety net between you and the ocean. This is not a resort beach. It is a wild, working coastline where the valley meets the sea with nothing in between, and the same waves that shaped the sand have taken lives. Hi'ilawe Falls drops over 1,400 feet from the back wall of Waipio Valley in a near-vertical freefall, one of the tallest waterfalls in Hawaii, and its flow depends so heavily on rainfall that during dry periods it thins to almost nothing, while after storms it thunders down with enough force to be heard across the entire valley floor. The falls once powered a sugar flume system that carried harvested cane from the upper fields down to processing facilities below. Industrial engineering bolted directly onto one of the most sacred landscapes in the islands, because in Hawaii, even paradise had to earn its keep. For the families who still live below it, Hi'ilawe is not a destination or a landmark. It is the backdrop to daily life, visible from taro patches, heard through kitchen windows, and as ordinary and reliable as the rain that feeds it. Molokai is the island that refused to change. There are no traffic lights, no resorts, and no buildings taller than a coconut tree. The community has fought every major development proposal for decades and won almost every time. The population hovers around 7,000 and one of the highest percentages of native Hawaiians of any island in the state lives here. Life still follows a pace closer to what Hawaii looked like before mass tourism arrived. On the north side, sea cliffs rise over 3,000 feet straight out of the ocean, and they are the tallest sea cliffs in the world. When Molokai's last pineapple plantation closed in the 1980s, unemployment hit levels the island has never fully recovered from. Kahiwa Falls drops over 2,000 feet down Molokai's North Shore sea cliffs. It is one of the tallest waterfalls in the entire state and one of the hardest to reach. There is no road, no trail, and no land access. The falls are visible only from boats offshore or from helicopters passing along the coast. During dry spells, the water slows to almost nothing. After rain, it cascades in thin white threads down rock faces so sheer and green they barely look real. Haleakala National Park covers the summit and eastern slopes of Maui's largest volcano. The drive from sea level to the top passes through more climate zones in 2 hours than most mainland road trips cover in 2 days. The name means House of the Sun. Hawaiian legend says the demigod Maui stood on this summit and lassoed the sun to slow its path across the sky. He did it to give his mother more daylight to dry her kapa cloth. Every morning before dawn, hundreds of visitors drive up to watch the sunrise above the clouds. So many people arrive that the park service now requires advance reservations to enter before 7 a.m. Below the summit, the park extends all the way to the coast through one of the most intact native rainforests left in Hawaii. Endangered species survive here in pockets that development and invasive plants have not yet reached. Haleakala crater is not technically a crater. It was formed by erosion, not eruption. Two valleys carved so deep into the volcano that they met in the middle and hollowed out the summit. The result looks like Mars dropped into a tropical island. Red cinder cones, grey ash fields, and almost no vegetation cover a basin wide enough to fit all of Manhattan inside it. The Haleakala silversword grows only here. It spends up to 50 years as a low silver rosette, blooms once, scatters its seeds, and dies. A life cycle so committed to a single moment, it almost feels personal. Temperatures inside the crater can swing 40 degrees in a single day. Hikers who enter in shorts often stumble out in near freezing wind, because the weather up here answers to no one. The Haleakala Observatory sits at the summit, above most of the Earth's atmosphere and nearly all of its moisture. That makes it one of the best locations on the planet for tracking satellites and near-Earth objects. The facility plays a direct role in identifying space debris and potential asteroid threats. A volcanic peak on a Hawaiian island is partly responsible for watching the sky for things that could end civilization. For native Hawaiians, the summit is sacred. The construction of observatories on Haleakala has sparked the same tensions over land use and cultural rights that erupted around the 30-metre telescope on Mauna Kea. Waimoku Falls drops 400 feet through a wall of green at the end of the Pipiwai Trail. Reaching it means walking through a bamboo forest so dense and tall that the stalks knock together in the wind. The trail fills with a hollow, rhythmic clicking that sounds like something alive. The pool at the base is closed to swimming. Constant rockfall from the cliff above has made it too dangerous, a fact that does not stop everyone, but probably should. Below the falls, the pools of Ohio cascade down the hillside in a chain of natural rock basins. Each one spills into the next before the whole system empties into the ocean. They are often called the 7 sacred pools. The name was invented for tourism. There are more than 7, and Hawaiians never called them that. Flash floods can turn these calm pools into violent channels in minutes. People have died here after being swept over the rocks during sudden rainstorms that started miles upstream and arrived without warning. Makahiku Falls appears first along the Pipiwai Trail. A 200-foot tiered drop is visible from a lookout just off the main path, where most hikers stop, photograph it, and continue toward the bigger falls deeper in. The Napali coast runs 17 miles along Kauai's northwestern shore. There is no road. The cliffs rise over 4,000 feet from the ocean, fluted by millions of years of rainfall into vertical ridges so sharp they look like the spine of something enormous. Hawaiian communities actually lived in the valleys behind these cliffs until the early 1900s. They farmed taro and fished the coast in complete isolation. The only way in was by sea or by trails carved into rock faces that would make most people turn around. Those communities are gone now, but the coast remains essentially untouched. No buildings, no power lines, no permanent human presence. It is one of the last stretches of Hawaiian shoreline that looks the way it did before anyone arrived. Helicopter tours and boat cruises bring thousands of visitors along the coast each year. The constant roar of engines over a place meant to be wild has become a growing source of tension with residents on the island. Kalalau Valley sits at the far end of the Napali coast. It is reachable only by an 11-mile trail that crosses 5 valleys, multiple stream crossings, and cliff edge sections narrow enough to make experienced hikers pause and reconsider. For decades, a loose community of squatters lived illegally in the valley. Some stayed for months, some for years. They built shelters, grew food, and disappeared from modern life entirely, until state authorities began regular enforcement to clear them out. Kalalau was one of the last places in Hawaii where taro was cultivated in near total isolation. The stone terraces those ancient farmers built into the hillsides are still visible under the overgrowth. Hanakapiai Falls drops 300 feet into a pool at the end of a 4-mile side trail. The path crosses the same stream multiple times. During heavy rains, the stream rises fast enough to strand hikers on the wrong side. A sign at the trailhead keeps a tally of drowning deaths. The number is not small. Hana State Park sits at the very end of the road on Kauai's north shore. This is literally the point where pavement stops and the Napali wilderness begins. The Kalalau Trail starts at the parking lot. After catastrophic flooding in 2018 destroyed much of the road and washed out bridges, the state rebuilt access with a strict reservation system. Daily visitor numbers are now capped. Locals had been asking for the limits long before the flood made them unavoidable. The park holds some of the most important Hawaiian cultural sites on the island. Hula platforms still used for ceremonies sit within its boundaries. A reef system offshore has been managed by local families for generations. Kauai Beach marks the end of the road and the beginning of the wilderness. A small crescent of sand is backed by cliffs on one side and the open Pacific on the other. The reef creates a natural pool, calm enough to snorkel in summer. In winter, the surf shuts the beach down entirely. For Hawaiians, Kauai is one of the most sacred sites on Kauai. The hula heiau at the edge of the beach has been a centre of dance and chant for centuries. Performances held here carry a weight that no stage on Waikiki can replicate. Parker Ranch covers over 130,000 acres of open grassland in the highlands of the Big Island. It is one of the largest cattle ranches in the entire country. It is also the last place most people would expect to find cowboys in Hawaii. Hawaiian cowboys, called Paniolo, were working cattle here before the American West even had its first ranches. Vaqueros from Mexico arrived in the 1830s to teach Hawaiians how to manage herds. The skills took root so fast that Hawaiian cowboys were competing in mainland rodeos and winning before many Western states were even settled. The ranch was founded by a sailor named John Palmer Parker. He jumped ship, married into Hawaiian royalty, and built a cattle empire on land granted by King Kamehameha. The town of Waimea surrounds the ranch at nearly 3,000 feet of elevation. Temperatures drop into the 50s at night. Fog rolls through the pastures in the morning. This version of Hawaii looks more like Scotland than the beach posters. Kailua Kona sits on the dry, sunny western coast of the Big Island. It is the opposite of everything people picture when they think of Hawaii. Barely any rain, brown lava rock instead of green jungle, and a heat that hits harder without trade wind to break it. This was where Kamehameha the Great spent his final years after uniting all the Hawaiian islands. The bay where he died sits directly next to a hotel lobby today. The modern economy runs on tourism, deep-sea fishing, and coffee. Kona coffee grows on volcanic slopes that produce some of the most expensive beans in the world, but labour costs are high, and younger generations are leaving farms they were supposed to inherit. Kealakekua Bay is where Captain James Cook landed in 1779. He was welcomed as a guest at first, possibly mistaken for the god Lono. Weeks later, he was killed on the same shore in a fight over a stolen boat. A white obelisk now marks the spot where Cook fell. Reaching it requires either a kayak across the bay or a steep, unmaintained trail through dry scrub. For native Hawaiians, the site carries a heavier weight than any monument can. Cook's arrival set off a chain of disease, trade, and colonisation that would eventually cost Hawaii its sovereignty. Pu'uhonua o Honaunau was a place of refuge. Anyone who broke the kapu, the sacred laws that governed every part of Hawaiian life, could flee here to avoid execution. The rules were absolute. A commoner could not let their shadow fall on a chief, eat certain foods, or enter certain areas, and a single violation meant death. The only way out was to reach this compound before anyone caught you. The stone wall separating the sanctuary from the rest of the coast was built around 1550, without mortar, and it still stands over 1,000 feet long. Royal bones were interred within it, because their spiritual power, their mana, was believed to make the sanctuary stronger. For the communities nearby, this is not a museum. It is proof that Hawaii had its own complete legal and spiritual system, centuries before outside contact. Lapakahi State Historical Park preserves a 600-year-old fishing village on the dry North Kahala coast. This was not a temple or a palace. It was where ordinary Hawaiian families lived, worked, and fed themselves from the sea for generations. The stone foundations of houses, canoe sheds, and fishing shrines are still visible along the trail. Every structure angled toward the water, every wall built to block the wind, every path leading to the shore. Families here used a system called ahupua'a, where each community was given a wedge of land running from mountaintop to ocean. Every household had access to fresh water, farmland, forest, and fishing grounds without ever leaving home. The village was eventually abandoned when freshwater sources dried up, proof that even the most sustainable way of life depends on conditions that can change. Mookini Heiau sits on the northern tip of the Big Island and is one of the oldest known temples in Hawaii, believed to have been built around 480 AD. According to oral tradition, the heiau was built in a single night by 15,000 workers passing stones hand to hand from Pololu Valley, 14 miles away. The Mookini family has served as hereditary guardians of this site for over 70 generations, passing the responsibility from parent to child for 1,500 years without interruption. Lahaina was once the capital of the entire Hawaiian kingdom and later the whaling capital of the Pacific, with hundreds of ships anchoring offshore each season. In August 2023, a wildfire driven by hurricane-force winds tore through Lahaina and destroyed nearly the entire historic district, killing over 100 people and burning more than 2,000 structures. The famous banyan tree, planted in 1873, was charred black by the fire, but survived, and months later began pushing out new green leaves from scorched branches. The rebuilding has been slow and contested, and long-time residents fear being priced out of the reconstruction by outside investors who see the empty lots as opportunity rather than loss. Every winter, humpback whales migrate over 3,000 miles from Alaska to the warm, shallow waters off Maui. It is one of the longest migrations of any mammal on the planet. They do not come here to feed. The whales eat almost nothing during their entire stay in Hawaii, surviving on fat reserves built in Alaskan waters. The whole trip is for mating, giving birth, and raising calves. Males compete for females by singing, and their songs can carry across entire ocean basins. Researchers have tracked how new melodies spread from one whale population to another, like a hit song moving across radio stations. The population has recovered dramatically since the whaling era, but ship strikes, entanglement in fishing gear, and military sonar remain constant threats in the same waters that protect them. Zhao Valley cuts deep into the West Maui Mountains, and at its centre, the Owl Needle rises over 1,000 feet from the valley floor. In 1790, the Battle of Kapaniwai took place here when Kamehameha's forces, armed with Western cannons, overwhelmed the Maui defenders so completely that the bodies blocked the stream. Kapaniwai means the damming of the waters, and the name is not a metaphor. The valley was sacred long before the battle. Hawaiian royalty were buried in hidden caves along the cliffsides, and the exact locations were kept secret to prevent the bones, and the mana they contained, from being disturbed or stolen. Today the valley is a state monument, and the stream still runs through it past taro patches and stone walls, though the lower sections have been heavily landscaped with introduced plants from Japan, China and Portugal. Flooding has closed the park multiple times. In 2016, a major storm washed out bridges and trails so severely that the monument was shut down for over 2 years. Rainbow Falls drops 80 feet into a circular pool near Hilo on the Big Island, surrounded by mango trees and wild ginger. Nearly every morning, the mist catches the sunlight at just the right angle to produce the rainbow that gives the falls its English name. Hawaiians call it Waianuenue, and the cave behind the falls is said to be the home of Hana, the goddess of the moon. Her name appears across the islands in place names, chants, and stories that predate written records. The falls sit just minutes from downtown Hilo, making them one of the most accessible waterfalls in the state. Papacolia Green Sand Beach is one of only 4 green sand beaches on Earth. Its colour comes from olivine crystals, a semi-precious mineral embedded in the surrounding volcanic rock that erodes out grain by grain and collects in the cove. The beach sits inside the cone of Pu'u-Mahana on the southernmost point of the Big Island. Reaching it requires either a steep hike down eroding cliffsides or an illegal off-road shuttle operated by locals who charge for the ride. That conflict between access, income and land rights is a microcosm of tensions across the islands. The beach is on ceded land held in trust for native Hawaiians, and the unauthorised vehicle traffic is accelerating the erosion of the very cone that produces the green sand. The olivine supply is finite. Once the cinder cone erodes completely, the green sand stops being replenished. Geologists estimate the cone has lost significant mass just in the last few decades, and at the current rate of erosion, the beach as it exists today may not survive the century. Punalu'u beach on the Big Island is jet black instead of green, made from basalt that shattered when hot lava hit cold seawater and exploded into tiny fragments. The waves have been grinding finer ever since. Hawaiian green sea turtles haul themselves onto the black sand here so regularly that the beach has become one of the most reliable places in the state to see them, lying motionless on the shore like boulders with flippers. Touching or approaching the turtles is a federal offence, but the real threat to them is a disease called fibropapillomatosis, which causes disfiguring tumours and has been spreading through Hawaiian populations for decades without a clear solution. The beach sits on land owned by a Hawaiian homesteads community, and the tension between protecting the turtles, managing visitor traffic, and maintaining local access is a daily negotiation. Palolu Valley marks the beginning of a chain of sea cliffs and collapsed valleys along the northern tip of the Big Island. The coastline here is so rugged and inaccessible that the communities which once farmed and fished here abandoned them one by one. The valley was once full of taro and rice paddies fed by streams running off the Kohala Mountains. When the plantation system redirected water for sugarcane irrigation upstream, the agriculture dried up and the last families left. A steep trail drops from the lookout to the valley floor, where the vegetation has grown back so completely that you would never guess the entire bottom was once cleared farmland. The cliffs on either side are actively eroding, and sections of the trail periodically close after landslides send tons of rock and mud into the valley below without warning. Pololu Beach spreads out in a wide crescent of coarse black sand, backed by ironwood trees, which were planted as windbreaks decades ago and have since taken over the shoreline. The currents here are dangerously strong, and the surf breaks directly onto the sand with no reef to slow it down. This is one of those Hawaiian beaches that looks inviting from the cliff above, but earns serious respect once you are standing at the water's edge. Mauna Kea is Hawaii's highest point at nearly 14,000 feet, and measured from its base on the ocean floor, it is the tallest mountain on Earth. In winter, the summit gets enough snow that locals go skiing and snowboarding on a tropical island in the middle of the Pacific. For native Hawaiians, Mauna Kea is among the most sacred places in the islands. The summit is considered the Pico, the navel connecting Earth to the heavens, and the mountain is regarded as an ancestor, not a piece of real estate. That spiritual significance collided head-on with modern science when the 30-metre telescope project was approved for the summit, triggering years of protests, blockades, and legal battles that became one of the most visible sovereignty conflicts in modern Hawaiian history. The Mauna Kea observatories are a cluster of 13 telescopes operated by 11 countries, together responsible for some of the most important astronomical discoveries of the past half-century. The summit's combination of high altitude, dry air, stable atmosphere, and minimal light pollution makes it arguably the single best location on Earth for ground-based astronomy. But 13 telescopes already sit on a summit that many Hawaiians consider desecrated by their presence, and each new proposal to build another reopens wounds that decades of consultation have failed to heal. The cinder cones scattered across Mauna Kea's upper slopes are the remains of smaller eruptions that built up mounds of loose volcanic rock around individual vents. Several of these cones contain Lake Waiau, one of the highest lakes in the Pacific Basin. Hawaiians considered it sacred and used it in ceremonies. Newborn children's umbilical cords were placed in its waters, binding them to the mountain from birth. Despite its dormant status, Mauna Kea is not considered extinct. Volcanologists classify it as likely to erupt again, which adds an uncomfortable footnote to the billions of dollars in telescopes sitting on its summit. The Oahu North Shore is where surfing stops being a sport and starts being a religion. A 7-mile stretch of coastline produces some of the largest and most dangerous waves on the planet every winter. In summer, the ocean goes flat, and the same breaks that generated 50-foot faces in January look like swimming pools. The local community is tight, protective, and built around the water. Families who have lived here for generations still enforce an unwritten hierarchy in the lineup, where reputation and how long your family has been catching waves at that break determine everything. The area's economy swings hard between seasons. Winter brings contest crews, photographers and sponsors who fill every rental and restaurant. Summer empties the town back to its permanent residents. Behind the surf culture, there is also a housing crisis. Vacation rentals and investor purchases have driven prices so far beyond local wages that families who grew up here are being pushed inland or off the island entirely. Haleakala is the gateway to the North Shore, a small plantation-era town with one main road, a working boat harbour, and a strip of surf shops, shave ice stands, and food trucks that serve as the social centre for the entire coast. The town was originally built around sugarcane, and the old wooden storefronts survived not because anyone preserved them on purpose, but because nobody invested enough to tear them down. A historic bridge crosses the Honolulu River at the entrance. Proposals to replace or widen it for traffic have been met with community resistance, because people would rather sit in the backup than lose the bridge. The breaks along this coast, Pipeline, Sunset Beach, Waimea Bay, are not just famous, they are testing grounds where careers are made and occasionally ended. Pipeline alone has killed more surfers than any other wave in the world. The reef beneath it is so shallow at low tide that a bad wipeout can pin a person against coral hard enough to break bones. Surfing here is not something you pick up on vacation. The locals who ride these waves grew up in the water, trained their bodies to hold their breath for minutes, and learned to read ocean swells the way mainland kids learn to read traffic. The professionalisation of surfing has brought corporate money to the North Shore, with sponsors, live broadcasts, and contest infrastructure that transforms quiet beach parks into temporary stadiums every winter. Honolulu is the only major city in Hawaii, and nearly 70% of the state's entire population lives on this single stretch of Oahu's southern coast. Everything about the city exists because of its location. The harbour made it a trading hub, the military made it a fortress, and the beach made it a destination. The cost of living here is brutal. Median home prices regularly rank among the highest in the nation, and a significant portion of the local workforce holds 2 or 3 jobs just to stay. Homelessness is visible and persistent, with encampments along beaches, parks, and highway underpasses that contrast sharply with the resort corridor a few blocks away. And yet, Honolulu has a warmth that has nothing to do with the weather. The mix of Hawaiian, Japanese, Chinese, Filipino, Portuguese, and Pacific Islander cultures created something that does not exist anywhere else. A city where plate lunch is the national food, pidgin is the street language, and talk story is not small talk, but a real form of connection. Aloha Tower was once the tallest building in all of Hawaii. For decades, it was the first thing passengers saw when arriving by ship. A 10-story clock tower with the word Aloha painted across all 4 sides. During the steamship era, boat days at the tower were massive celebrations, with bands playing and lei sellers lining the docks to welcome arriving passengers. Today the harbour is quieter and the tower is surrounded by a marketplace that has struggled commercially for years, but the structure still stands and still says the same word on every face. Waikiki Beach is the single most visited destination in the state, a 2-mile crescent of sand backed by a wall of high-rise hotels so dense it looks like a city that accidentally grew a beach at its feet. The The sand itself is not entirely natural. Waikiki's original shoreline eroded so badly over the 20th century that the city imported sand from other parts of the island, and even from California and Australia, to rebuild the beach. Before the hotels, Waikiki was a wetland and a taro-growing area. The farmland was drained, filled, and paved over to create the tourist district that now defines Hawaii's image to the rest of the world. Locals still surf at Waikiki. This is where the sport was popularised for the wider world, largely by Duke Kahanamoku in the early 1900s. But the lineup is crowded with beginners on foam boards. The beach that represents paradise to millions of visitors was engineered into existence, maintained with imported sand, and built on top of the farmland that once fed the people who lived here first. Hula is not a performance for tourists, or at least it was never supposed to be. It is an oral tradition, a way of recording history, genealogy, and spiritual knowledge through movement and chant that predates written language in the islands by centuries. Christian missionaries banned hula in the 1800s, calling it immoral, and it nearly disappeared entirely before King Kalakaua revived it as a deliberate act of cultural preservation. The Merry Monarch Festival on the Big Island is now the most prestigious hula competition in the world, and dancers spend years perfecting every gesture because each hand movement has a specific meaning. The fire dance performed at luau shows is actually Samoan in origin, not Hawaiian, but it has become so associated with Hawaii's tourism industry that most visitors do not know the difference. The Spitting Caves sit at the edge of a residential neighbourhood in the Portlock area of Honolulu, where multi-million-dollar homes line the cliff and the ocean explodes through a sea cave below with enough force to launch water 30 feet into the air. The cliff itself is unfenced and unstable. People have died here, both from cliff jumping into water that looks deeper than it is, and from standing too close to an edge that is undercut by the same ocean doing the carving. Diamond Head is the most recognisable landmark in all of Hawaii, a 300,000-year-old volcanic crater that rises behind Waikiki like a giant natural wall. Its English name came from British sailors who mistook calcite crystals on the slopes for diamonds, a mistake that must have been disappointing once someone actually climbed up and checked. The US military built a network of tunnels, bunkers, and observation posts inside the crater during both World Wars, and the concrete stairs that hikers climb today were originally built for soldiers scanning the horizon. Over 3,000 people a day now make the climb to the summit, which is why the state now requires advance reservations. Diamond Head Lighthouse has been guiding ships along Oahu's southern coast since 1899, and it is still an active Coast Guard navigation aid. The lighthouse sits on federal land at the base of the crater, closed to the public, and surrounded by some of the most expensive residential real estate in Hawaii, where homes with a view of it regularly sell for 8 figures. Kaneohe Bay stretches along Oahu's windward coast like a protected lagoon, the largest sheltered body of water in the main Hawaiian Islands, shielded from open ocean swells by a barrier reef that runs nearly the entire length of the bay. The communities around the bay are where a large portion of Oahu's working population actually lives, commuting through tunnels bored directly through the Ko'olau Mountains to reach jobs in Honolulu on the other side. The bay itself was heavily damaged during the 20th century, with military runoff, sewage discharge, and dredging destroying large sections of the reef. A decades-long cleanup effort has brought back coral growth in areas that were considered dead. A sandbar near the centre of the bay emerges at low tide and has become one of the most popular weekend gathering spots on the island, where families anchor boats and set up grills on the exposed sand. Molly Pond is one of the last intact ancient Hawaiian fish ponds on Oahu, a walled enclosure built directly into the bay's shoreline centuries ago, designed to trap juvenile fish inside and let them grow to harvestable size. The engineering is deceptively simple. A low stone wall with wooden grates called makaha allowed small fish and seawater to flow in, but prevented grown fish from escaping. At their peak, hundreds of these fish ponds operated across the Hawaiian Islands, producing enough protein to sustain large populations. Some researchers now study the system as a model for sustainable food production. The Ko'olau Range runs the entire length of eastern Oahu like a jagged green wall. It is not a mountain range in the traditional sense. It is the remaining half of a massive shield volcano that collapsed on its eastern side millions of years ago. Rain hits these cliffs constantly, and the windward side of the range receives so much precipitation that waterfalls appear and disappear across the cliff face depending on the day. The ridgeline trails along the Ko'olau summit are considered some of the most dangerous hiking in the state. The ridges are sometimes only a few feet wide, with vertical drops on both sides, and soil so wet that every step is a judgment call. The Haiku Stairs, also called the Stairway to Heaven, are a set of nearly 4,000 metal steps climbing straight up the Ko'olau ridgeline, originally built by the Navy in the 1940s to access a radio station at the top. For decades, hikers climbed the stairs illegally before dawn to avoid security guards, and the trail became one of the most photographed locations in Hawaii. In 2024, the city of Honolulu began removing the stairs entirely, citing safety concerns and the impact on the residential neighbourhood at the base, where hundreds of hikers would show up in the middle of the night, blocking driveways. The removal itself became controversial. Some argued the stairs should have been repaired and opened legally, while others said the structure had been deteriorating for years, and keeping it was inviting a disaster. Kualoa Ranch covers 4,000 acres of valley and coastline on Oahu's windward side, and it has been privately owned by the same family since 1850, when the land was purchased from King Kamehameha III. The valley's dramatic ridged cliffs and open grassland have made it one of the most filmed landscapes in the world. Jurassic Park, Lost, and dozens of other productions shot here. But Kualoa was sacred long before it was a film set. In Hawaiian tradition, it was a training ground for chiefs' children, and even the highest-ranking alii were required to lower their sails when passing by canoe as a sign of respect. The ranch now operates as a combined cattle operation, farm and tourism business, a model that keeps the land productive and the family solvent in a state where holding onto open land without developing it is increasingly difficult. Kualoa Beach Park sits at the base of the valley where the mountains meet the bay, and from the sand you can see Molokai Island rising from the water just offshore. On weekends, the park fills with local families who arrive early to claim pavilions for all-day gatherings. Coolers, folding tables, ukuleles, and enough food to feed the entire extended family. Molokai Island, commonly called Chinaman's Hat for its shape, sits just offshore from Kualoa Beach, and at low tide, adventurous locals wade and swim across the shallow channel to reach it. In Hawaiian legend, the island is the tale of a giant lizard slain by the goddess Hi'iaka, Pele's sister, and the rocky peak is all that remains of the creature's body after it was cut down and thrown into the sea. The island is a state bird sanctuary, and seabirds nest on its slopes in numbers dense enough that the guano streaks are visible from shore, a reminder that wildlife still claims whatever humans have not paved over. Hanauma Bay is a curved volcanic crater whose ocean-facing wall collapsed thousands of years ago, flooding the interior and creating a sheltered cove that eventually filled with one of the healthiest coral reef systems on the island. By the 1990s, over 3 million visitors a year were entering the bay, stepping on coral, feeding fish processed food that disrupted their diets, and churning up sand that smothered the reef. A mandatory educational video now plays before anyone is allowed onto the beach, and visitor numbers are capped by a reservation system that limits daily entries. Coral health and fish populations have measurably improved in the years since these rules were introduced. The bay is also a reminder of how military history sits just below the surface across Oahu. During World War II, the area was used for cable and communications operations, and unexploded ordnance has been found in the surrounding hillsides more than once. For locals, Hanauma Bay is complicated. It is simultaneously one of the island's greatest natural assets and one of its most heavily managed tourist attractions. And every decision about how many people to let in is also a decision about how much money to leave on the table. Koko Head is a volcanic tuff cone on the southeastern tip of Oahu, and the trail to its summit follows the abandoned tracks of a World War II-era tramway that once hauled supplies up to a military observation post. Over 1,000 railroad ties are set into the hillside at an angle steep enough to burn your legs before you are halfway up. The hike has become one of the most popular fitness challenges on the island, and on any given morning, the trail is packed with locals who treat it less like a recreational hike and more like a daily gym session. The tramway bridge near the top, where the tracks cross an open gap with no solid ground beneath, is the point where most first-timers stop, look down, and seriously reconsider whether the summit photo is worth the remaining 50 steps. At the top, the view stretches from Diamond Head to the windward coast, with Hanauma Bay directly below and the open Pacific fading to the horizon. The Halona blowhole sits in a shelf of volcanic rock just past Koko Head where the ocean has carved a tunnel beneath the surface. When swells hit at the right angle, compressed air and seawater explode through a narrow opening in the rock with enough force to launch spray 30 feet into the air. On a calm day, visitors see nothing but a hole in the rock. When the surf is up, the blowhole fires every few seconds, and the mist carries far enough to soak anyone standing too close. The cliff around the blowhole is unguarded and uneven. People have been swept off these rocks by waves they did not see coming. Makapu Lighthouse stands on the easternmost point of Oahu, perched on a cliff over 600 feet above the water. The lens inside the tower is a hyperradial Fresnel lens, one of the largest in the country, shipped in pieces from Paris in 1909 and assembled on site because nothing that size could be hauled up the cliff in one piece. The lighthouse has no road access. Construction crews had to haul materials up by mule and cable, and the keepers who lived there spent years in near-total isolation. The trail to the lighthouse viewpoint is one of the most popular hikes on Oahu, and in winter, the cliff is one of the best places on the island to spot humpback whales breaching in the channel between Oahu and Molokai. The waters below are notoriously dangerous. Makapu Beach at the base of the cliff is known for its powerful shore break, waves that detonate directly onto the sand with enough force to break necks. Mauna Island, better known as Rabbit Island, sits just offshore from Makapu, and its rounded hump rising from the water looks exactly like a rabbit, crouching with its ears folded back. The name comes from a failed rabbit farming operation in the early 1900s. Rabbits were released on the island expecting a commercial venture, and they bred fast enough that they had to be removed before stripping the island bare. Today, landing on Mauna is illegal. The island is a protected seabird sanctuary where wedge-tailed shearwaters and brown boobies nest in numbers large enough to keep the place off limits to human traffic. Lanikai Beach is less than half a mile long, but it has been ranked among the best beaches in the world so many times that the rankings themselves have become part of the problem. Every list draws more visitors to a residential street, with no public parking, no restrooms, and no sidewalks, overwhelming a neighbourhood that was never designed for traffic. The water here is absurdly calm and clear, sheltered by an offshore reef and the twin Makulua Islands that break incoming swells before they reach the shore. There is no beach park and no public facility of any kind. Every access point is a narrow path between private homes, and the residents who live on these lanes have spent decades trying to manage a daily invasion of visitors. The housing along Lanikai is among the most expensive on the island, with oceanfront lots selling for millions. The wealth gap between the people who own the homes and the people who clean them is one of the starkest illustrations of Hawaii's inequality, compressed into a single, half-mile stretch of coast. The Mokulua Islands, Mokunui and Mokuiki, sit about a mile offshore from Lanikai. On calm days, the channel between the beach and the larger island fills with kayakers making the crossing. Moku Nui allows daytime visits, but landing on Moku Iki is prohibited entirely. It is a seabird nesting sanctuary, and the shearwaters and terns that breed there need the kind of quiet that human visitors are physically incapable of providing. The paddle across can turn dangerous quickly when trade winds pick up in the afternoon, and inexperienced kayakers who set out in calm morning conditions sometimes find themselves fighting a headwind on the return, a scenario that generates Coast Guard calls, often enough to be considered routine. The Lanikai pillboxes are two concrete bunkers built on the ridge above the beach during World War II, positioned to give military observers a clear sight line across the windward coast and the channel toward Molokai. The hike is short but steep. Reaching the first pillbox involves scrambling up loose red dirt on a trail that has been worn into a series of increasingly creative shortcuts by the thousands of people who climb it every week. The bunkers themselves are covered in graffiti now. Layers of paint accumulated over decades, and the military hardware is long gone. At sunrise, the light hits the Makulua Islands and the Lanikai shoreline from below the horizon in a sequence of pinks and golds. That view is why the parking situation at the trailhead is already impossible by 5:30 a.m. Pearl Harbor is not just a memorial, it is still an active military base and the headquarters of the US Pacific Fleet. Over the water where the attack happened, warships still dock, helicopters still fly, and the daily business of projecting American power across half the planet continues right next to the site where that power was nearly broken. The USS Arizona sits on the harbour floor exactly where it sank, and oil from its fuel tanks still leaks to the surface, a slow seep that has continued for over 80 years. More than 1,000 sailors remain entombed inside the wreck, and surviving crew members were given the option to be interred inside the ship when they died. Several chose it. Waimea Beach runs over 3 miles along the windward coast, the longest continuous stretch of sand on Oahu, and one of the few beaches on the island that still feels empty on a weekend. The town behind it is small, rural, and predominantly native Hawaiian. Waimanalo has one of the highest concentrations of Hawaiian homestead land on the island, with many residents living on parcels originally set aside by the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act of 1920. The community is tight. Families here have known each other for generations, and the local economy runs on small farms, roadside fruit stands, and a few plate lunch spots that serve portions large enough to feed a crew. The Dole Plantation sits in central Oahu, on land that once produced most of the world's canned pineapple. The industry was so dominant that it reshaped the entire island, importing tens of thousands of workers from Japan, the Philippines, China, Portugal and Korea, who came for plantation wages and ended up building the multicultural society Hawaii is today. Pineapple was not native to Hawaii. It was brought from South America, grown on land taken from the Hawaiian kingdom, and harvested by immigrant labour under conditions that ranged from hard to exploitative. When cheaper production overseas made Hawaiian pineapple too expensive to compete, the plantations closed one by one, leaving behind empty fields, displaced workers, and a few tourist attractions where visitors pay to ride a train through what used to be someone's job. What Pineapple left behind is complicated. The plantation system created something genuinely unique. The pidgin language, the plate lunch, the local identity. But it did so inside a power structure that enriched a handful of mainland corporations, while the workers who made it possible rarely owned the land they lived on. Hanalei Bay is a 2-mile crescent on Kauai's north shore, backed by mountains so steep and green that waterfalls appear across the cliff faces after every rain. The town of Hanalei sits behind the bay with a single main road, a handful of shops, and a 1-lane bridge at the entrance that acts as a natural speed limit on development. Nothing wide enough to support resort-scale traffic has ever been built here, and the bridge is the reason why. Taro fields spread across the valley floor behind the town, still farmed by families who have been growing the same crop in the same soil for generations. Surfing here is serious. Winter swells wrap into the bay and produce waves powerful enough to host professional competitions. But the reef is sharp and shallow, and the currents pull hard enough that even strong swimmers get pushed out of position fast. The community has fought multiple proposals for large-scale development over the decades, and so far the town has stayed small. Not because no one wants to build, but because the people who live here have made it clear they will fight every permit. Molokini Crater is a crescent-shaped volcanic rim rising from the ocean floor about 3 miles off Maui's southwest coast. Only the very top breaks the surface, creating a natural half-bowl that shelters the interior from waves. That shelter made it one of the clearest snorkeling sites in Hawaii. Visibility regularly exceeds 100 feet, and over 250 species of fish live inside the crater walls. During World War II, the US Navy used Molokini for bombing practice. Unexploded ordnance was found on the ocean floor as late as the 1970s. Tour boats bring hundreds of visitors to the crater every morning, and the cumulative impact of sunscreen, anchor damage, and human presence has raised concerns about whether the reef can sustain this level of attention. Access is boat only, and no one is allowed to set foot on the crater rim itself. Molokini is a marine life conservation district and a seabird sanctuary, and the rules exist because the ecosystem inside disappears the moment you stop protecting it. Akaka Falls drops 442 feet in a single free fall on the Big Island's Hamakua coast. The plunge is so deep and the gorge so overgrown that the pool at the bottom is almost invisible from the viewing platform above. The trail loops through dense tropical growth, bamboo, ginger, orchids and ferns taller than a person, with air so thick with moisture that everything drips even when it is not raining. The park sits in what was once sugarcane country. The communities along the Hamakua coast were built around the plantation economy that dominated this side of the Big Island for over a century. When the last sugar mill closed in the 1990s, the coast lost its economic engine and never fully replaced it. The small towns along this stretch now survive on farming, tourism spillover, and stubbornness. Hanauma, the closest town to the falls, has a single main street lined with aging storefronts that now sell crafts and shave ice. A town that found a second act by standing next to something people wanted to see. Napali Beach stretches 3 miles along Maui's west coast, lined end to end with resort towers built so close to the waterline that high tide practically laps at the pool decks. Before the hotels, this was sugarcane land. The beach was empty, and a single development plan in the 1960s turned agricultural land into one of Hawaii's first purpose-built resort districts. At the north end, a volcanic rock formation called Black Rock juts into the ocean. Every evening at sunset, a hotel employee lights torches along the cliff, performs a brief ceremony, and dives off the rock into the water below. The ritual is loosely inspired by the Hawaiian belief that this is where spirits leap from the physical world into the afterlife. Behind the resorts, the workers who clean the rooms and serve the food commute from towns further inland where rents are lower. The gap between who enjoys ka Napali and who works there is not subtle. It is built into the geography. The ka Napali coffee farms grow on the slopes just above the resorts. The same volcanic soil and elevation that once supported sugarcane now produces small batch coffee that sells at premium prices to the hotels below. It is one of the few working farms left in a zone almost entirely consumed by tourism. Hapuna Beach is half a mile of white sand on the Big Island's Kahala coast, wide, clean, and exposed to open ocean swells that make it one of the best body surfing beaches in the state. In summer, the water is calm enough for families. In winter, the surf can double or triple overnight, and lifeguards pull people out of the water daily. The sand here is not volcanic black, like most Big Island beaches. It is made from coral and shell fragments, which makes Hapuna a geological anomaly on an island dominated by dark rock. Resort developments dot the shoreline, built on rock so young that construction crews had to blast and grade raw basalt just to lay foundations. The Kahala coast gets almost no rain. Fresh water for the resorts is pumped from wells drilled deep into the volcanic rock, and every green lawn and swimming pool along this stretch exists because someone engineered it. Pupehe, called Sweetheart Rock, rises 80 feet straight out of the ocean, off the southern coast of Lanikai, separated from the cliff by a narrow channel of churning water. According to Hawaiian legend, a warrior named Makapu hid his lover Pehe in a sea cave at the base of the cliff to keep her safe. A storm surge flooded the cave and drowned her, and he jumped to his death from the top of the rock. Lanai itself is almost entirely owned by a single billionaire. The island has a population of roughly 3,000 and virtually no economy outside of hospitality, making it the most extreme example of private land control in the state. Wailua Falls drops roughly 80 feet in a double cascade that splits around a rock ledge and reunites in the pool below. It is one of the most photographed waterfalls in Hawaii because you can see it from a roadside lookout without hiking a single step. The falls became famous outside Hawaii as the opening shot of the television show Fantasy Island. Millions of people recognized this waterfall decades before they knew what island it was on. In Hawaiian tradition, ali'i, chiefs, proved their courage by jumping from the top of Wailua Falls into the pool below. A wrong angle or low water would have been fatal, which was precisely the point. The flow varies dramatically with rainfall. After a dry week, the falls narrow to two thin streams. After a heavy storm, the entire cliff face turns into a single thundering curtain of brown water. The Royal Coconut Coast runs along Kauai's eastern shore, named for the coconut groves that once lined the entire stretch, planted by Hawaiian royalty who considered this coast sacred enough to live on. The groves are still there, though many of the palms are aging and falling. Coconut rhinoceros beetles arrived on Oahu in 2013 and have been spreading, killing palms across the state. Kapa is the closest thing the east side has to a main town. During rush hour, which on Kauai means about 20 cars, traffic backs up in both directions because there is no bypass. The coast is where most of Kauai's affordable accommodation sits, serving visitors who cannot afford the North or South Shore resorts, but still want to be on the island. Bike paths now run along sections of the old Cane Hall Road. The rails are gone, the sugar is gone, but the flat coastal route turned out to be perfect for the one thing nobody planned for: recreation. Kilauea Point Lighthouse sits on the northernmost tip of Kauai, where the beam once guided ships through one of the most dangerous stretches of water in the Hawaiian chain. The lighthouse was decommissioned in 1976 and replaced by an automated beacon. Restoration brought it back as the centerpiece of a national wildlife refuge that protects the surrounding cliffs. The headland is one of the best places in Hawaii to see seabirds up close. Red-footed boobies, Laysan albatross, and great frigate birds nest on the cliffs in numbers dense enough that the sky above the point is rarely empty. The Hawaiian monk seal is one of the most endangered marine mammals on Earth, with a total population hovering around 1,500. Every single one of them lives in Hawaii, because this species exists nowhere else. Females give birth on shore and nurse their pups for about 6 weeks, during which the mother does not eat at all. She loses a third of her body weight, while the pup nearly triples in size. On the main islands, monk seals increasingly haul out on populated beaches, which creates conflicts with beachgoers who do not always understand that approaching within 50 feet is a federal crime. Conservation efforts have been aggressive, and the population has stabilised, but it has not recovered. Paia sits on Maui's north shore at the start of the Hana Highway, a former sugar plantation town that reinvented itself as a surf and hippie outpost in the 1970s and has been drifting upmarket ever since. The town is small enough to walk in 10 minutes. A single main street holds surf shops, boutiques, galleries and restaurants crammed into old wooden buildings that still look like the plantation storefronts they used to be. Ho'okipa Beach, just east of town, is one of the premier windsurfing and kite surfing spots in the world. Trade winds funnel through the valley and hit the coast with enough consistency that professional riders relocate here specifically for the conditions. Sea turtles haul out on Ho'okipa's beach every afternoon, so predictably that volunteers rope off sections of sand and stand watch until the animals return to the water. Paia's identity is unstable. Long-time residents remember it as a working town, with cheap rent and empty beaches. Now a plate of fish tacos costs $20, and the surf culture that gave the town its soul is being priced out by the lifestyle brand it accidentally created. Waianapanapa State Park sits along the Hana Highway on Maui's eastern coast, a black sand beach backed by jagged lava rock, sea arches, and caves that cut into the cliffside like wounds. The sand is jet black and coarse, made from pulverized basalt. Walking on it barefoot in the afternoon sun is a mistake you only make once. Two freshwater caves sit just off the beach trail. According to Hawaiian legend, a princess named Popoalaya hid inside one of them to escape her jealous husband. He found her and killed her, and every spring the water in the caves turns red. Science attributes the colour to swarms of tiny red shrimp. Locals attribute it to her blood returning with the season. The park now requires advance reservations for entry, a system put in place after years of overcrowding. Degraded the beach, the caves, and the trails. Poipu sits on Kauai's south shore, the dry, sunny side of an island, famous for being one of the wettest places on Earth. While the north shore drowns in rain, Poipu gets over 300 days of sunshine a year. That climate made it the obvious spot for Kauai's resort industry. Hotels and condos line the coast, and the beaches here are groomed and lifeguarded in a way that most of the island is not. In 1992, Hurricane Iniki made direct landfall at Poipu and flattened nearly everything. The resorts were destroyed, homes were levelled, and the entire south shore had to be rebuilt from the ground up. Monk seals haul out on Poipu Beach regularly enough that rope barriers are a permanent fixture. Tourists line up behind them with phones raised while the seals sleep through the attention. The original Hawaiian settlement here was a fishing village. The Reef offshore still produces, and local families still fish it, though they now share the water with snorkel tours and catamaran cruises that did not exist a generation ago. Behind the resorts, the workers who run Poipu's tourism economy live in towns further inland, where rents are lower. The commute adds another cost to jobs that already pay less than the rooms they service. Opeka Falls drops 150 feet into a green gorge along the Wailua River. You can see it from a roadside pullout, which makes it one of the easiest major waterfalls to see in the entire state. The name means rolling shrimp in Hawaiian, after the freshwater shrimp that once tumbled over the falls in such numbers that they were visible from below. The shrimp are still there, but in far fewer numbers than the name suggests. From the same overlook, you can see the Wailua River winding through the valley below, with the remains of ancient Hawaiian fish ponds and temple sites along its banks. The falls run year-round but peak after heavy rain, when the stream turns brown with upland soil and the drop doubles in width. This is Hawaii, a place where the land is still being made, the ocean is still taking it back, and the people who live between those two forces have built something that exists nowhere else on Earth. Now, if you don't want to miss the most unreal wonders of the Netherlands, check out this video.